To the other story we've been following today, and this is the Mueller investigation, this probe. No collusion was the headline. Also at the same time, though, not an exoneration per se of Donald Trump in terms of any sort of, in terms of obstruction of justice charges, I should say. So no charges are going to be laid. No collusion remains the headline out of that. Democrats are saying the 2-year saga is not over. Joining me now live from Washington, DC, is Aaron Maté, a contributor at The Nation. He was a prominent voice in US media doubting any Russia collusion. Thanks very much for your time today. What's your take, first of all, on what we know so far? Only, I should say, 4 pages, a very brief synopsis of the report have been released.
Well, it's finding on the main issue of whether or not there was a conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia is not a surprise to me and those of us in the media who paid attention to the actual facts. This whole thing sounded outlandish from the beginning, and all the developments since have, I think, shown that. And so it's no surprise today to see Robert Mueller, after this exhaustive investigation, dozens of witnesses, sweeping investigative authority, come to the conclusion that I think was pretty obvious from the start, that this idea of a conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia was non-existent.
As for the investigation as a whole, I mean, we've seen plenty of indictments out of it, and also, what do you make of this other part of the report, that in terms of obstruction of justice, it's more about the fact that there's certainly no evidence in terms of bringing charges, but it's certainly not necessarily a full exoneration, if you like?
Well, I was surprised by that part because, Robert Mueller has a reputation for being, by the book and exacting and diligent with the facts. And he, had plenty of time to look into this issue, and he basically punted. He passed the ball. He did not want to make a decision. And I think I cannot prove this, but in my hunch is that that was a political decision. I think he was looking at the fact that this whole country was fixated on this idea of a Trump-Russia conspiracy theory. He knew, I think, long ago that the evidence was not there for that. So to perhaps soften the blow and to think about his legacy, how he'll be remembered, he basically deferred on the issue of obstruction and passed it on to Attorney General Barr, who then ruled that there was no obstruction because, by his reasoning, it didn't make sense to charge Trump with obstruction if Mueller had concluded that he did not commit the underlying crime, i.e., a Trump-Russia conspiracy theory that Mueller was investigating. So the issue of obstruction now, I think, will be used to pivot from the fact that Mueller found no collusion, but it shouldn't distract us from the core issue here was whether or not there was a conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia. And on that front, Mueller was unambiguous that there was not.
Yes, I guess you're saying if there's no collusion, what would you need an obstruction of justice move for? Or what are you covering up at the same time? The number of people that have once upon a time worked with Donald Trump that have had a downfall because of this. It's impossible to ignore that as well, right?
Of course, you can't ignore it. But the fact is, the most serious crime that was committed in Trump's orbit were those committed by Paul Manafort. And those, as both judges in his trials noted, had nothing to do with Russia collusion or with the 2016 election. They were about financial crimes and bank fraud pertaining to his lobbying work in Ukraine well before the election. So it's true, and it's not a surprise for me as a Trump critic to see that there is a web of criminality around him. My objection was with this question of whether or not there's a conspiracy between Trump and the Kremlin. And it is true that there were other crimes found in the process, but if you look at the most serious one, Manafort, it's for crimes that have nothing to do with the election in 2016, and the rest of the figures are basically indicted for process crimes that resulted after the investigation started. None of them were committed during the actual campaign, and that's the most salient fact here. For all this hype we've been hearing about for 2 years, not a single American was indicted for conspiring with Russia.
That is a good point. I suppose it also does highlight the fact that for people out there who have been trying to bring down Donald Trump, the obsession with the collusion aspect, is that now going to hurt them? Should they pivot quickly? And we're talking about the next presidential campaign. If you keep talking about this report that said no collusion, people are going to start to say, well, hang on, Wasn't he cleared?
Well, yeah, I mean, this speaks to a very important point and one I've been trying to make tirelessly for 2 years. People who came after those of us on the progressive left who were skeptical of this whole narrative, they called us Trump defenders. But I think our detractors had it in reverse. Our whole point was that by fixating and banking on this evidence-free conspiracy theory, those who promoted it were poised to hand Trump a massive reelection gift because now, as Trump is already doing, and I'm sure him and his Republican
Mm.
allies will run with this, they're going to claim exoneration. And they do actually have grounds to point to being targeted. What the FBI did in this investigation is worthy of scrutiny. And I think Trump and his allies will now use that for all the political utility that they can. So all of this has taken our focus off of Trump's actual policies, which is a gift to him. It's also now given him another gift by giving him this exoneration to claim. So I think now is the time for Democrats to do what they've avoided: is mount a serious alternative to Trump and deal with all of these serious issues that Russiagate has helped us avoid.
Aaron Maté from The Nation, thanks very much for your time today.
Thanks for having me.